Hi. Today I wish to talk about the free worlds theory and why I'm critical of it. This was sparked off by comments on a video by a user who said the following. West European and American workers belong to a society class called labour aristocracy. They are allies of the bourgeois and imperialists. They participate in the profits from the third world that is exploited by Western corporation. They are class enemies for Latin American and Asian proletariat, peasants and national bourgeois like Gaddafi. He goes on to say, Western capitalism crisis don't create revolutionary situation. Labour aristocracy, 10 to 20% of all working people, doesn't change in the proletariat, whatever that means. It is only a little poorest in the global scale, is still very rich. Labour aristocracy and petty bourgeois don't fight for revolution and socialism. They want more sources from exploitation of the third world. In socialism, first world societies will lose profits from the third world and the level will be lowest. Labour aristocracy is reactionary. And he goes on to complain that in 200 years there hasn't really been any revolutions in the West, but there have been several in the East. Now this is exemplary of the way that this theory is used in common discussion, and there are many flaws in this thinking, and its effects have a negative influence on the workers' movement. Firstly, it's a violation of the Marxist idea at the most basic level. For me, the cardinal principle, the underlying philosophical and emotional force underlying Marxism, is singled out in a particular phrase: workers of the world unite. This means that the working class across the world must consciously and voluntarily cooperate in overthrowing the bourgeoisie and replace national capitalism with international socialism and a classless society. This is a revolutionary characteristic that sets Marxism apart from all other ideologies. It's all-inclusive. It makes no distinction between race, gender, age, sexuality and nationality. It says that all working class people must join together in this mass struggle. And it's this focus on the international working class which sets it from class collaborationist ideas such as fascism and pre-Marxian ideas of revolution, like those of Buchanan, who predicted that only 100 people would be needed to overthrow the capitalist class. It's the idea that all people cooperate in this, or all working class people. The free worlds theory, however, goes against this. It makes no distinction between the ruling class of the so-called first world and the working class of the first world. Working class people in the first and second world are apparently in league with the capitalist class. They apparently desire to exploit the third world and have no interest in fighting imperialism. And they are class enemies of the proletariat in the third world. Never mind the millions of people across the Western world who campaign against imperialism and against capitalism and the like, and never mind the millions who struggle for workers' rights. They are all labour aristocrats. Not only do proponents of this theory ignore that these workers exist, but they offer no solution on how to resolve this supposed contradiction. However, I would assume that if they had one, it would be genocidal in nature. Instead of working towards unity with the working class of the world, this theory draws yet another line between the workers. It builds another wall to divide the workers, to weaken them. It's another fallacy designed to further exploit the masses. Instead of the working class, especially in developed countries, being the driving force in history, as Marx and Lenin taught us, it is supposedly the third world moving us forward. There is an intense anti-dialectical element to this theory too. It denies that capitalism works the same way in the first world as it does in the third, that class struggle exists in the first world, and that poverty and exploitation occurs in the first world. Trust me, we have people living in poverty in the UK, in the USA, in Japan, and every other rich country, because that's how capitalism works. What about China? China is the second richest economy in the world, and surely that's a first world nation too. Are the starving farmers and exploited factory workers of China a labour aristocracy? Do they support imperialism, exploitation, and big capitalism? I somehow doubt it. We as Marxists categorise by class because we recognise that different classes have different interests, different roles to play, that in all nations there are oppressed and oppressors, exploited and exploiters, and workers and capitalists. Of course, the third world has borne the brunt of this exploitation, of wars, proxy wars, colonialism, exploitations, etc., which is why the working people of these nations must seek to unite with the working class of all other nations. The Third World is poor and weak. It is unable to defend itself properly against imperialism without support. Could the Vietnamese have won without support from China and Russia? No. Could the Mujahideen in Afghanistan won without foreign support? I don't think so. Could the people of China, in their communist struggle against the Kuomintang and the invading Japanese, won without support from Russia? Again, I don't think so. Every other imperialist attack on an unsupported Third World country has sooner or later succeeded. This is why the workers of the Third World need to unite with the workers of the First and Second and stand in solidarity with each other and work in our own ways towards a common goal. The people of China and Russia supported Vietnam, and in the end it was victorious. So instead of, categorizing all these millions of people who are themselves exploited, although to a lesser extent, and yes, they enjoy a higher standard of living, instead of classing all these people as enemies, it's workers of the world unite. You have to work with these people because they see things from their end. They actually have the power to stop this exploitation. There are a couple of other points I'd like to make about the comments. They participate in profits from the Third World that is exploited by West Corporation. They are class enemies for Latin American, African and Asian proletariat, peasants and national bourgeoisie like Gaddafi. Firstly, no one chooses to participate in these profits, as he puts it. I would assume that most of these profits go back either into the war machine or into the pockets of the private companies that are paid to rebuild a country after the West has bombed the shit out of it. This is actually quite similar to Osama bin Laden's ideological justification for killing civilians in 9/11, that because the government is democratically elected, they must support killing Muslims, and that's just ignorance in the extreme. In the West, our democracy is limited and curtailed at every turn, but that's a subject for another video. Secondly, as I previously explained, we are not class enemies of the Latin American, African, Asian proletarians or peasants. But except, and this disturbed me, the national bourgeoisie like Gaddafi. I mean, of course we are class enemies of bourgeoisie like Gaddafi. I mean, no one should be out there bombing him, but that does not mean that he or any other bourgeois ruler is the friend of the working class. And this is another aspect of Maoism I don't like, though there are aspects of Maoism that I do like. But this particular one of class collaboration, and this is another Marxist concept that is tantamount to left fascism or social fascism. The guy who wrote this, who claims that all working class people in the West are reactionaries, but at the same time claims to be an internationalist, and excludes Poland, his home country, from this analysis, despite the fact that Poland contributed to both Iraq wars and is probably providing material support to the Libya war, or at least moral support, which makes it pretty goddamn imperialist in my book. His other point that he made, which I'll quickly address, is that while the Third World has seen many revolutions, the Western workers have done little in that time. And firstly, Western people have been pumped full of anti-communist and reactionary propaganda for nearly 100 years, and considering that for a great deal of that time there was a risk of a nuclear war between the West and the Soviet Union, it wouldn't be surprising that many Western average Joes are suspicious of communism. And the Soviet Union in itself was a failure in many ways, and that serves as proof to many people that communism shouldn't be bothered with. And of course the Third World has seen many revolutions due to its inherent instability, the poverty, constant war, the after effects of colonialism, whilst the West has been stable and mostly peaceful on the home front. To suggest that this is because the First World workers are reactionary is nonsense and anti-dialectical. Revolutionary conditions have not yet come about in the West, but they will, don't worry. If you don't believe me, take a look at Greece. Us Euros can do class struggle too, That's all I have to say on the subject. Thank you for listening.